You know, it's funny, because just about everything I said about the previous episode as far as the slow build-up thing kind of applies here as well. You know, normally I'm actually in favor of a slow boil story, but this one hasn't been moving much, really. I mean, right at the beginning it's like, so, I'm going to call in Bester. But we all kind of saw that coming, didn't we? I mean, ignoring the fact that that's right at the beginning of the episode. She flat out said, they get 40 days off. And then Bester can come reclaim them. So this was not new, unless they actually got their world. This was happening, right? So that's like, okay, the logical happens. I'm with it. Cool. I do have to admit, one of the scenes, I know this is a weird thing to nitpick, but so much of the dialogue and writing is pretty top-notch in Babylon 5 that it's kind of jarring when it isn't. There's a scene where Lockley, God, I keep forgetting her name. I actually was just making fun of myself today because I keep forgetting her name. Ivana Batu. Lockley goes down and is like, what's going on? And Zach's like, well, they've got these other ways. Now, usually when you have a line like that, you do so because it is then going to be demonstrated visually for the audience. But then what happens is, like 5 seconds later, he says, yeah, like I said, they got other ways, and then proceeds to explain it. It's needlessly repetitive, and it's also unnecessary since they actually did show what was happening. And Bester later explains it quite cleanly. I mean, not literally. He just says, this is an old trick of theirs. There's no bomb. There was no need for the extra layer there. It's weird seeing an unnecessary aspect of writing in a Babylon 5 script like that. I don't know. Anyways. So, everything I'm about to say is going to sound like a repetition. Like, the telepath plot is the only one that really moves forward here, but really it basically just takes one more step forward. Bester is now involved, and the violent revolutionaries have turned violent. That is kind of it, so I don't have much to talk about. For example, I could mention how Byron mentions flat out, we don't betray our own. And I could point out the parallels between him and Bester again. Bester's a little more callous about it, but Bester flat out says, oh no, some of these people are dead. Oh no, these aren't my people. These are your people. My people are over there, and I'm still trying to get to them. I mean, the parallels are becoming more and more stark and more obvious. I do have to admit, though, Byron pissed me off again in this episode. He reaches out to get a message out to Lockley. Okay. He wants to talk to her one-on-one because he thinks she's reasonable and she believes that he can be reasonable. Okay. Now, this is the kind of thing that we see a lot in fiction, and honestly, has also happened in real life with diplomats and ambassadors at about the World War II and previous era. I don't actually know past that all that well, but I know it used to happen. The idea being that two people who know each other and are like, okay, look, our government is kind of loco right now, and your government's kind of loco right now. Why don't we get together, these two individuals, and actually talk this out and figure this out? And then they do so, and then some stuff happens, right? This has happened many times in history. So it makes sense to me that he would reach out to her, because she's actually been quite fair and has actually basically stuck her neck out for him at least once with the aforementioned delaying tactic with Bester. So he calls her in, and it's like, she's like, all right, let's lay this out, because she's going in with the mentality of let's make this work. Byron shuts her down at every turn, and then she's finally like, in frustration, why did you call me in here? And he says, oh, I wanted to say goodbye. And he says it in the most passive-aggressively insulting way, without actually being passive-aggressively insulting. I'm going to try to explain what I mean by that. He says it in a way that's very insulting, but I have no doubt was not intended to be insulting, if that makes any sense. The kind of elitism that isn't forced, but rather is passive. You have never been kind, you've never gone out of your way to be kind, but you've at least been fair. As if kind of begrudgingly allowing her the allotments of being someone who is worthy of consideration, and that must be marked, therefore, I wish to say goodbye. Let's recount. in a tense standoff with heavy political repercussions and a lot of potential damage in lives and backlash and political repercussions back home for the other telepaths and God knows what else. He made her crawl through a vent for unknown period of time, very cramped, very uncomfortable, to get in here, to see him, on faith, without a weapon, so he could say goodbye. Not so Lita could say goodbye. What? I mean, I know Byron isn't that smart, and I know he's really got a flair for the dramatic, but... What? You could have done that through the wall, buddy. Oh my God. And then, of course, we have this wonderful thing. One of the few things about... I don't like this episode that much, if it's not obvious. But one of the things I really do like is there's this stark contrast. So Byron's, let's call them militiants. Let's call the violent group. So Byron's militiants versus Byron's pacifists. So Byron's militiants are going like, you know, they're spraying the walls. Like, oh God, Bester's here. We gotta get guns. Yeah, you're gonna tell us everything, or we're gonna kill you. Yeah, we're gonna make this happen. Then we're gonna shove your hand on it. It's totally amateur, I think is the word I want to go with here. It's just them. It feels like a bunch of kids who've never actually done a revolution before, who are like, yeah, quick, fight the man, yeah. But that's deliberate, because it is almost immediately contrasted, and I think like the next scene, or the intervening scenes, by Bester, who is very professional, knows exactly what he's doing, and does it very cleanly and very professionally. No, I've seen this trick before. There's no bomb. Take a step forward. There's no bomb. Go ahead and put your hand on the wall. It's okay. Go ahead and do it. Yep, okay. I'm blocking him. Continue. The contrast between the two is stark. And of course, we see that as well in the actual firefight. When the zealots are like, yeah, kill in Byron's name! Kill in Byron's name! They're not actually saying that. But, you know, there's this sense of just frantic, Bester, cold. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Bester is better here. The contrast is in their approach. It is worth noting that they at least care about what they're doing, whereas Bester is approaching this as if it's a Tuesday. But nevertheless, the presentation of their two different methodologies is fascinating. And that's all I have to say about the Telepath plot, also known as the primary plot of the episode. I do want to say this about the other plot, the other half of the plot, the Natoth plot. I enjoyed the Natoth plot a lot. Now that's no surprise, because it involved Londo and Jakar, and I hate to say this for, I think, like the 5th season now, because I think I've been saying this since season 1. But Londo and Jakar are awesome. So, you notice how Jakar's like always eating, by the way, ever since he got to Centauri Prime? I mean, they even make fun of it in the last episode, but they just keep it up. Gotta have some more spoo. Now, as much as there's some awesome and even funny bits with the dialogue, like for example, Malari brings in the woman, says, "Excuse me, stand before me. Yet turn around." I mean, okay, what do you think was going through her mind when he was doing that? Because of course that's what was going through her mind. I mean, everyone was thinking it. I'm pretty sure Jakar was actually thinking it too. Animal magnetism, you know. How do I put this? I find it somewhat disgusting that it's normal. Because it is normal in Centauri society. It's kind of played for laughs, but it's mostly played for laughs in the misunderstanding kind of laughs, rather than she's a sex object kind of a laugh, because that's not funny. But the idea of Londo not treating her as a sex object because oh no, I just need your clothes to help rescue a friend of a friend. You know, that's okay. Okay, we're with it. You know, I'm not trying to stir up a big controversy here. What I do want to point out is the idea that this is just another little insight into Centauri politics. It reminds me, and I know this is going to sound weird, of the episode Mirror Mirror, all the way back in the original series. There was a woman on the Mir Enterprise, and I actually can't remember her name right now, forgive me, who used her... There's no nice way to say this. She was a woman, and so she used sex as a method of advancement. Now, I'm not going to get into that right now. I probably will be covering the original series sometimes in the future. I hope you guys are hyped for that. I'd actually really like to go back through the original series sometime, especially with full analysis mode on. But the relevant point here is that it was a society in which that was the norm. Whoever happened to be in charge at any given point in time was someone with power, and power is desired before all other things. And some of the women within that circumstance, not all of them, because we see Uhura actually has a bridge position, so it's not like they're completely segregated on gender lines, but one of the methods of obtaining power is willingly, there's no nice way to say this, trading what you have available. And that is what we get the impression here with the Centauri, that certain women of the court basically function as concubines and use that to gain favor, money, frivolities. The reason she can afford that nice dress is probably because of the fact that certain people of the court have had sex with her. I'm just going to say it. I'm not going to dance around it. Have been engaged in sexual escapades with her. And she flat out admits that she used to do stuff with Cartagia, excuse me. Although the only thing she admits is that he used to dress up in her dress. Which, I mean, whatever. But you can see where that's slanted. It's an interesting society when that is being perceived like that. I'm saying this very neutrally because there's nothing else I can say without just completely nosediving into gender politics, and I gotta be honest, I just don't want to. All I'm going to tell you is the truth. Some people have asked before, I'm talking about this in a B5 episode, no one's going to hear this. One of the big reasons why I tend to be against romance in fiction, and one of the biggest reasons is because of the fact that it's usually used for bad effect. I've talked about that extensively. But one of the other reasons is that for me, personally, the real-life person right here, sitting in this chair, romance and sex are very deeply personal things. It's between me and her, because I'm into women, so in my case it's between me and her, and that's it. There's no one outside that. You know, I don't go sleeping around. I don't like the idea of sleeping around. I don't do cheating. I don't want like a concubine situation. I don't want to kiss and tell. Very private, very personal. That's how I look at it, right? So when I see something like this where it's broken down into what is effectively a commodity, which cheapens it in such a severe extent, that's why that kind of bugs me. However, it is worth noting that that's not really for me to judge, and I am not laying judgment, because that's not my friggin' job. If someone is willing to trade on the commodity, and that's all it means to them, if sex is to someone, male or female, nothing more than a commodity, well, then that's their choice. And, well, if there's one thing I tend to adhere to more than anything else, it tends to be the choice of the individual. I should have probably brought down the controversial box for this one, but whatever. I already get people who call me a horrible misogynist, sexist pig for the fact that I criticized Janeway over on Voyager, so, I mean, whatever. Next thing I want to talk about, now that we're done with that, is the horrific nature of the Forgotten Order. Obviously, we see the direct nature of it with Natoth, a prisoner who is literally forgotten. And that's messed up. I mean, that sounds flippant, but that's because, as Natoth herself says in this episode, there are no words at a certain point. At a certain point of reality, words can't keep up. I know this from my real-life experiences with the kidney issues I had before I had to go in for surgery. At a certain point, words don't convey what you're going through. And words don't properly convey what happened to Natoth. And so the episode does an interesting thing, because, I mean, as a writer, you kind of have to use words, right? So they tell a parallel story. Londo, with wonderful gravity, tells a story about a guard who guarded a spot on the floor, spot on the courtyard, for, I shouldn't say a guard, a guarding spot where guards would stand for 2 centuries, because there was a flower there once that the daughter of the emperor 2 centuries ago wanted guarded. And that order was never countermanded, and that's the way their particular monarchy works. That very effectively gets across the horror of it, because it brings it back. It brings it back into a relatable range, something that words can describe. And then you start thinking about it, and you start wondering, because that's what really strikes the horror. Yes, we see Natoth, and God, your heart just rushes out to her. And we hear about this stupidity of people guarding a spot on the ground because of one order that everyone forgot about. But then you start thinking, how many other orders are there? How many other non-countermanded orders have been given in the history of the Centauri Republic in order to do things like guard a spot on the ground or keep a prisoner just locked up and fed forever? Yeah. I do love how Londo pretty much throws himself into getting her out, though. That doesn't surprise me. This is Season 5. We have a pretty good idea of who Londo is, and he has effectively completely finished his character arc. And so, I mentioned the question many moons ago, should, and indeed can, Londo be redeemed? That is, of course, still up to you to decide. But there is no doubting that Londo himself is actively trying to do right. That is something that's pretty much in stone at this point in time. The fact that he goes so far out of his way, pretty much just to help Natoth because it is the right thing to do, says something. Now, you could argue that G'Kar was threatening him and all that, but none of that means anything. Londo has, to be blunt, faced worse than G'Kar. And G'Kar was acting out of anger. Not at Londo, it's worth noting. He was acting out of anger at the situation. The very idea that his friend had been abandoned here for 2 years is, well, it's beyond words. And so he rants and he rages, and then Londo helps him. Arranges the escape. In fact, to be blunt, G'Kar kind of didn't do anything. Londo got Natoth out, and I think that is very relevant. He even embarrassed himself at court just to make sure it happened. And that may not sound like a big deal, but consider Londo Mollari, the politician, the man who 4 years ago cared so much about his rank and his prestige and how he was viewed by others, is willing to just slosh around like an idiot to try and get her out. One random Narn. Well, in fairness, he knew her, but still, that is significant. And I think that contrast is needed to really showcase the character arc of Londo Mollari, where he was and where he is now. Good episode. Or rather, half of a good episode. Maybe we'll take another step forward next week when we get back to more Babylon 5. Oh, sorry. Got into the moment there. I'll see you around, guys.